Okay, the fluids have been checked. We're in the car. Have the keys in the ignition. It's time to fire this podcast up. That's right. You've heard it, ladies and gentlemen. The Cordova's been fired up. It's time for the WaltPar Podcast right here. Uniting all generations and types of Mopar fans, lovers, and enthusiasts everywhere. From Walter P. Chrysler to today's Mopar and beyond. This is the WaltPar Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am your host, Scott Gresser. My handle is Mopar since 1960, and I'm also social media director at the Mid-Ohio Mopars Club out of Worcester, Ohio, and I'm ever so grateful that you can join me here on the WaltPar Podcast. You can email me at waltparpodcast@aol.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Rumble, although I don't have anything on YouTube and Rumble yet, at WaltPar Podcast. I have no website as of yet. We'll see what happens in the future. Finally, my first podcast, I'm getting it ready to roll here. This is episode number 1 of the WaltPar Podcast. So grateful it took a long time to prepare this. I'm retired now, so they say you get a lot busier in your retirement years, and they are not kidding. I have been very busy, been wanting to do this, working on a project car, as well as driving the Cordova to shows, which I haven't done too many this year because I'm keeping the money saved to get the Demon 340 done. But I'll have more on that later. My name is Scott Gresser. I was born and raised in Worcester, Ohio, and on November 13th, I'll be turning 70 years old. After living in other towns in the Port Clinton area, which is my adopted hometown, I moved back to Worcester in 2016. I graduated from Worcester High School in 1972, which I found out later in my life. It was a very significant year in the auto industry. And we'll have more on that on a future podcast. What got me into cars? Well, way back when my dad showed me how to check the oil on his 1960 Dodge Seneca. That's how I learned. It was first year for the Slant 6. The car was light blue, dog dish hubcaps with 3-on-the-tree manual. I was only 6 years old back then when that happened, and it got me hooked on Dodges. In fact, as the years went by, my mother started a flower shop in the fall of 1972. Her first delivery vehicle was a 1958 Plymouth four-door wagon, which she was a calligrapher, and she made the stencil, taped it on the car, and painted the quarter panels with the logo of the bouquet shop. But she needed a larger vehicle to do her deliveries, and at that time, Dodge was just coming out with a new compact van, the A100. And my mom, Mary Gresser, was the first owner of an A100 van in Worcester, Ohio. But as I was growing up as well, my dad was friends with the owner of the Dodge dealer in Worcester. His name was Walter Bates. When my dad would take me to the dealership, I would always jump in the new cars in the showroom and pick up all the latest sales brochures and constantly look them over. Didn't know much to look over then like I do now, but I still have those. A lot of those are colored up. Did my modifications to them, so they're not really worth much. They still have a lot of great information in them, but hey, it's just the way it is. So, but I still have them, still look things over. Way back in the summer of 1970, when I just got done with my sophomore year in high school, and with my love of Dodges, Dad got me a job in the parts department at Walter Bates. So I worked summers there, and after I graduated from high school, was there full-time until 1973. I then worked at Chrysler Dealer Parts Departments off and on until 2016. And through the years, looked up parts for muscle cars, front drives, LH, neons, modern Hemis, and trucks of all types, large and small. Despite all the changes through the years, I still love Mopars. But for full transparency's sake here, since I retired from full-time work last December, I told a gentleman who I've known for a long time, and he's a great friend. His name is Dale Wolf. Dale asked me if I would like to run parts for the dealership he works at. It happens to be a Chevrolet dealer. So I do work at the Chevrolet dealer in Worcester, running their parts, picking up parts, and the like. And I do that for 3 days a week, all day during the week, on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Gives me a 4-day weekend every weekend. Can't ask for any better part-time job in your retirement years than that. I've owned Mopars all of my life. I've owned 13 vehicles total, still own 4 of them. 2006 Chrysler Town & Country Touring. It has over 335,000 miles on it now. I have a 2014 Town & Country S. That's the sporty model. Has a Grand Caravan RT headlight bezels or headlight assemblies in it. Has the same black chrome grille bars and stuff like the 300 sedan or 300S. 1976 Cordova, which I've had since 1977. And a 1971 Dodge Demon 340 I told you about earlier. I'm in the middle of putting it back together. I've owned it since 1979. Cordova was restored body-wise in 1990. Front seats and the mechanicals were all done in 2018. So while the car may not look like it, it does have certain kind of patina to it if you look hard enough. But I also have a Demon 340. Like I said, I'm in the middle of a restoration. The paint and body work were just done. Fantastic job. Now it's up to me to get the rest of it put back together. Never done this before in my life. That's why I was in parts, because I'm not that mechanically inclined, but I'm learning. And so, I have a lot of friends who can help me, plus 4 from up above in heaven who can look down and give me some encouragement. I was pretty much a Mopar fan all my life until 1984. I actually didn't stop loving Mopars. That was when I saw an ad in the Hemmings Motor News back then, and went to my first Mopar Nationals in that same 1976 Cordova I own today. It was held in Indianapolis, Indiana, and from that point forward, after seeing how people talk, listening to them, finding out about their cars, I went from being a Mopar fan to becoming a Mopar enthusiast. When I was able to look at the Mopar parts books, I even studied them deeper than what I ever did before. The sales brochures I would still collect till about 2000. I got some off and on since then, but I studied them even deeper too. I was consistently talking to fellow Mopar owners about their cars. I looked them over with even more detail than I ever did before. When I walked the aisles of the swap meets, I would try to figure out what all the pieces would fit on what. Pretty good on the trim stuff, the nameplates, the moldings, taillights, stuff like that. But other things I'm not, but it's a great way to learn, and I love every minute walking through the swap meets. So after the Mopar Nationals in 1974, I joined Mopar Muscle Club International, which is no longer there. But I didn't renew my membership after a while due to logistics because the club was located in Illinois. So in 1991, somewhere around there, I joined the Mid-Ohio Mopars, which was located in Worcester. So now I had a club I could do something with. Their slogan, though, was a car club for the Mopar enthusiast. Each year, they would put on an all-Mopar show and swap meet. They still do it today. We just had our 32nd one just done in conjunction with Mopars at 42, which was called Mopar Madness. It was at Dragway 42. Our show was a show portion for that event. Great drag strip at Dragway 42 in West Salem, Ohio. But each year in the early 1990s, muscle cars were king. Judge classifying was understandably geared towards them. Classifying other Mopars was never researched. Here's proof. A Dodge Stealth won the front-wheel drive class one year, and an owner who had a Shelby Shadow CSX was very mad, and he had very good reasons to be mad. After that fiasco, I took over the judge chairmanship for next year's show. I even made a book to show where each vehicle was to be judged and where each car would be classed in. But that didn't work. They didn't want to look through the book. And what they did was they put a LeBaron convertible in the same group as trucks and vans. The reason why is because that LeBaron convertible had wood grain sides and had the nameplates Town and Country. So that meant it was a truck. So I had to figure out and tell get the gentleman in the right class with the front wheel drives. But after light arguments I've had with the club way back when, a few years later, I quit. I did move out of town for a while. When I moved back to Worcester in 2016, I did rejoin the club. But one thing good came out of all this beforehand was while I was making the judging book, I still kept doing it after I left the club and kept it up. I've got it done through about like 2013 or 14, I think it is. But I learned a heck of a lot more about Chrysler products as I went along. So as I told you before, my handle was Mopar since 1960. Started out as an email address at a dealership I worked at who, despite Chrysler's asking, did not want to use a domain name for the dealership's email addresses. So I chose that because the dealership itself started in 1960. But after I left the dealership, I kept the email address. Used it for a separate Facebook page for my car hobby. But even after thinking about it, it actually turned out deeper than that. Because if you remember how I said how I got hooked on cars, that was back in 1960 when Dad showed me how to check the oil in the 60 Dodge Seneca. And so it fit perfectly again, Mopar since 1960. I'm also on forabodiesonly.com. My account is Mopar since 60. So another podcast. Why would someone want to start a podcast when there's millions of them out there? I've always had a love for radio, ever since I was a kid as well. Wished I could be behind the microphone like I am now. But I did want to be on the radio. Loved dial cruising to see what stations are playing what talk and music. Still do so today, especially at night on AM. But with broadcasting, I have to do what they want me to do, tell me what they want me to say, and work odd hours or weekends to do it. But with and found out later on in life I was doing that anyways with other jobs. But with podcasting, I have the freedom to choose what I want to talk about. Subject is obviously Mopars and my love for them. But there is more. You heard me say at the beginning of the podcast, uniting all generations and types of Mopar fans, lovers, enthusiasts everywhere, from Walter P. Chrysler to today's Mopar and beyond. Folks, you know as well as I do, that's a very tall order, especially in Mopar circles. I found out it's not so much from hate or not caring for other people's cars. It's more of a matter of pride. And that pride goes back generations. A lot of people my age, remember I'm still 69, bought and fixed up the muscle cars mainly because that's what they grew up with. Graduated from high school at the time, college, whatever. They wanted that kind of a car because they couldn't afford it when they were a kid. They can now. That's what they wanted. But back in the 80s, I had a slightly older gentleman tell me that long ago he didn't care for the muscle cars because they had no style to them. He loved the cars from the 1950s. Three-tone paint jobs, the fins, the sculptured dashboards, lots of chrome and more. I could see his point. And 2 years ago at a Cars and Coffee held in Medina, some young kids came to an event in their modern Mopar muscle cars, They went out, looked at the other modern muscle cars that were there, then they left. They didn't even look at anything else. So sticking only with what you grew up with, no matter the generation, has kept the fracturing going. I'm hoping to cure some of that in my podcast. I'm not looking for group hugs like it was back in my day, in my youth. But I want to make sure I can give a respect and appreciation for what else is out there. For instance, we have always talked about cars built in the 1960s and 70s and how people are knowledgeable knowing they are A, B, C, and E body cars. But when it comes to anything newer, they're all in a group, like the front drives, LX cars, etc. Folks, they all have body codes too. Why don't we learn to use them like we do the A, B, C, and E body cars? Remember, I still have a muscle car, so it's not like I'm cutting the people down. But why haven't we learned those codes yet? There's no reason not to, because there's a lot of great things to learn about Chrysler products. I'm hoping to bring them out in this podcast. And if you're wondering, the LX cars, they come in LA, LC, LD, LE, and LX bodies And the next generation charger will be an LB body. I got that from Robert S. Miller of MoparsInsiders.com. So I'm hoping this podcast will raise the learning curve, not just for you out there, but I'm wanting to learn myself too, because I know a lot, but I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything, not even Galen Govier or whoever. Nobody knows everything, but that's what we're here for. So that's why I think we could use another Mopar-related podcast. There are 3 currently out there already, and I feel, like I said before, my knowledge and trivia to share with you. And like I said, I hope we'll learn together. I've been wanting to start a podcast for several years, but until last December, I was still working full-time, like I said. And being a terrible manager of my time, I was unable to get the ball rolling. But now I can. Yes, it's been almost 11 months since I retired, but we all have things to do. But like I said, there were 3 other podcasts that beat me to the punch. Rich with the Dodge Pod, which is a Dodge truck podcast. The T-N-T podcast with Tara Graves and Tina Bogus, where they mainly race the modern challengers. They're very good people. And the one I heard first, the Mopar hunter himself, Chris Albrecht, hosting Talking Mopars. Let me tell you something about Chris. He has helped me out so much in getting my podcast going. He told me what equipment to buy, what podcast service to use, etc. He did that. He's been more than willing to help. Whenever I had a question, he always answered it for me. There were times when he said he'd like to do a show on certain Mopars, such as he wanted to do one on the 50s, wanted to do more on trucks, the Little Reds and Express. But there's also times where he didn't do a show for a couple months. That's when he purchased but there's a reason for that. And like I said, he didn't do a show for a couple months. It's been a little while again, especially back when he purchased the 72 unfinished Roadrunner. And he was on a small timeline to get it running and take it to the muscle cars at the Strip in Las Vegas. That was just early this year. And in my opinion, that was a huge undertaking. And again, this is in my opinion, it burned him out. Was I mad? Because he promised all this, was going to do this and do that. Not at all. You have to remember something about Chris. Chris is married, has a family, and he has a full-time job. He loves being with his friends. He loves working on his cars. He loves going to events too. But all that takes time. And so putting together a podcast for all of us to enjoy, he doesn't have to do a podcast if he doesn't want to, for starters. And on top of that, all he does, he makes sure, it takes time to do a quality podcast. So he thinks of you all the time in wanting to do one, but he has other obligations first, just like the rest of us do. Please keep that in mind. It all takes time for him to do it, the podcast, but he also needs to have time for himself as well. And he has a good time with the people he's with. He's gained some very good friends to the podcast. He keeps in touch with them, also likes to keep in touch with his family. And on top of that, whenever you leave any comments, he at least gives you a like where he at least read it. So please, don't get mad if you don't get a podcast from Chris Albrecht every once in a while. He has a life to lead. We all do. Chris, you'll always have my support. You could even do one once a year or once a month, once a week. It doesn't matter. I thank you for what you've done for the Mopar community, because you have done a lot. So you got a lot of fans out there who want you to do more. But really, all you people want them to do more podcasts, fine. Why don't you do your own, just like I'm doing right now? This is my spot because I'm using this platform. Spotify for Podcasters gives you that opportunity for you to put out your own podcast. You don't really need any fancy equipment, a laptop, notepad, even your smartphone will do. Will get you started. Lots of YouTube videos are out there to help you along. And so you can do it. It's real easy to do a podcast. You think you can't talk well? I bet you can talk better when it's a subject you love. Gardening, politics, cars, trucks, trains, handyman, travels, whatever the case may be. There's somebody out there who wants to hear your voice. Please do it. It's free to use. Cheryl Atkinson of the News uses it. For people in the Cleveland area, Andre Bernier has the Weather Jazz podcast. He uses Spotify for podcasters as well. Go to podcasters.spotify.com for more information. Now, there were so many ways I could have done my podcast, and with Chris debuting his first, I was so glad he actually did, because it carved out a clearer path for me to what I would do for mine. Some of the things I'd like to do is bring you up to date on news and happenings at Stellantis, give you a monologue on some issues affecting the Mopar hobby, a feature portion with guests, and yes, with all that's been happening, there's a lot of subjects to cover. What Mopar clubs are out there, and go through all the Mopar events happening around the world, and wind up reading some of your emails whenever you send them in that I have received. This is the format I've chosen so far. If you want to have your club highlighted, please email me with your information or even contact info. We can get you on the podcast at WaltPar Podcast at AOL.com. Same with show happenings. Send in your flyer or your information. I'll put it on the calendar, and we'll get that information out there. I want only all Mopar shows only. Nothing with all makes. Even if it's an organization that you respect, I still want to keep it all Mopar. So please, only all Mopar events. Send them to me, WaltPar Podcast at AOL.com. If you send me a very good quality picture of your flyer, I'll put it on the Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter pages, which is, again, at WaltPar Podcast. So I'll put that up on social media. So please email me again, WaltParPodcast at AOL.com. And give me any information you have on your show, event, the date, times, location, things like that. And please, again, let me know, WaltPar Podcast at AOL.com, and we will do our best to get your car show and car club featured. That's pretty much it for now. I don't want to talk too long. This is an introductory podcast. I know there's no fancy intro or anything. Hopefully, I'll be working on that for the future. I hope this will get going. Hope you liked what I did for podcast number 1 of the WaltPar Podcast. But before I go, I really would like to thank some people who helped me on this journey to get me here. Again, I want to thank Chris Albrecht for all his help and with what equipment to buy and other questions I've had in the beginning. I really picked his brain big time, but I really thank you so much. In the beginning, I wanted to call this podcast the Mopar Perspective, but using the Mopar name requires permission from Stellantis to use the Mopar name in the title. There was a new Mopar club in Ohio that was formed this year. It's called the Ohio Mopar Group, and it was founded by one of the founding members was Ron Cook. And Ron gave me the contact information for Trademark Resources Incorporated. And I want to thank Ron for that, because when I emailed Trademark Resources, I was put in contact with a great gentleman. His name is Kyle Golab, Golab. For months and months, since the beginning of the year, Kyle and I would be emailing each other back and forth. And the reason was nobody ever asked using the Mopar name for a podcast before. It was obviously a learning experience for the both of us, but Kyle was great at getting back to me, always courteous, always kind, had one phone call with him. Great gentleman. I can't thank him enough for all he did. But it got me to change my mind. He was very patient. He understood why I chose the name WaltPar. And I swear, Kyle, if I ever make it up to Michigan, sometime I hope I get to meet you. There's a lot of people out there, too many to mention here, that were willing to help and contribute also, but I thank everybody so much. But those are the two main people right there. So thank you so much for joining me on the WaltPar Podcast. As always, remember, you can email me, WaltParPodcast at AOL.com, for comments, concerns, show postings, or any show suggestions. You can snail mail me at P.O. Box 455, Apple Creek. That's 2 words, Apple Creek, Ohio, 44606. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X as they call it now, YouTube, and Rumble at WaltPar Podcast. And please don't forget to check out the other Mopar-related podcasts, the Dodge Pod, T-N-T podcast with Terry Graves and Tina Vargas. And, of course, Talking Mopars with the Mopar hunter himself, Chris Albrecht. Thank you so much for listening to the WaltPar Podcast. Hopefully we'll see you in a month's time when we get everything put together. I can start on my next script, so I know I don't forget everything, because I am partially reading this from a script, so I know I didn't forget everything. But hopefully I'll be back in a month. We'll do like I said I was doing for the podcast format. So we'll see you here next time. And as Mike Bonadonna of the Citrus County Mopar Club says, keep those highways beautiful. Drive your Mopars. Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you later. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.